The road along the Little Western and near the miniature railway had been damaged over the winter. What was once smooth tarmac was now full of cracks and potholes. It wasn't safe for lorries and buses to travel on the road, as poor Bulgy discovered one morning.
It's all the railway's fault. They ruined my beautiful roads just to pay me out. I don't know how, but they did it, I tell you.
The engines all laughed at Bulgy's misfortune.
Whatever you say, Bulgy.
We'll try not to go mad with all this peace and quiet. Free the roads from railway tyranny!
But nobody was laughing the next day when they saw who was sent to mend the road. Yes, it was none other than George the Steamroller.
Railways are no good. Turn them into roads.
None of the engines liked George. He was always making fuss about how railways should be ripped up.
Rollers are rubbish, so good riddance.
His nasty attitude caused trouble for himself and everyone around him. Some engines knew this for a fact. Some thought he was even worse than Bulgy. At least Bulgy respected the fellow road vehicles. George, on the other hand, barely respected anyone.
Huh, call yourself a car? You're a disgrace to the road. Find yourself a scrapyard.
The engines on the Little Western were very unhappy with having George around.
We trade in for one anti-rail nonsense for an even nastier one.
Ugh, ain't that always the way?
Oh, so much for getting some peace and quiet around here.
Duck looked towards the major engines in concern.
Take care, you lot. George is a brute through and through, and he doesn't take kindly to anyone.
Rex snickered, looking at the grumpy red engine.
Sounds like someone I know.
That overgrown rolling pin doesn't scare me.
Jock liked to show off how tough and strong he was.
Nor me. If George gives me any trouble, I'll just push him aside.
All right, that's enough, you two. George will only be here for a few days. Just don't bother him, and he won't bother us.
The little engines didn't know George that well, but didn't seem to worry. Duck, on the other hand, was very worried.
Don't say I didn't warn you.
So for several days, the workmen laid the tile over the cracks and filled the holes in the road. Then, George rolled the tile nice and flat. For a while, things were peaceful. George was enjoying himself and felt very pleased with his work. But then they reached the level crossing. Repairing this section took longer than the rest, as every now and then, the workmen had to step aside to let the trains go by. The men didn't mind the break. They liked to wave to the engines as they passed by.
Hello, Rex.
George, however, did mind.
Why should I stop with those railway tinker toys? They keep interrupting my important work. My beautiful road will never be finished at this rate.
Oh, hush. We're making good time. Besides, they still have a railway to run. And unless we absolutely have to block the truck, you'll just have to put up with it.
Huh. My work's more important than those rail-bound pipsqueaks. Why can't they wait for me?
Then, a devious idea flew down George's funnel.
Yes, I'll do it tomorrow.
The next morning, Bert was happily making his way down to the ballast mines with a line of hopper trucks. There was a large order of ballast needed. Bert was making good time. Until he rounded the bend near the level crossing.
Gah! Bust my boiler!
His driver braked just in time. George was sitting on the tracks blocking the line.
George, what are you doing? Let me through.
No can do, Puffball. We're still working on this part of the road. You'll just have to wait.
There's no time to wait. I have ballast to collect for Duck's train.
Then that rattling heap of scrap iron will have to wait too.
Honestly, George, be reasonable. We still have a railway to run.
And I have a road to fix. If I keep letting you tinker toys interrupt my work, it'll never get done. Now toodle off. Unless you want to be recycled under my roller.
George rolled forward slowly, trying to scare Bert. Bert wasn't easily scared, but he was cross. So is his driver.
Come along, Bert. Let's just go back. There's no point arguing with this jabaloni.
So Bert sighed and puffed back to the yard while George smiled with triumph.
He can't possibly stay on the line all day.
But George could, and he did. Whenever another engine came along trying to go through the crossing, there was George blocking the line. No matter what any of them did or said, he wouldn't move. Some of them were even afraid that he would flatten them with his roller. In the end, they all crawled back to the yard, too frustrated to argue with George. That's how it went all morning. George felt very pleased with his plan. Now he could work in peace. Back at the yards, things were far from peaceful. George was blocking the line. Everyone was trapped. Trucks, passengers were delayed, and no one could collect the ballast for Jock. Everyone was complaining to Mr. Fergus Duncan, but he could only answer so many at once. The engines were fuming in the shed.
This is ridiculous. How can one entitled steamroller monopolize the whole railway?
I tried to warn you. George doesn't do anything halfway. That includes scheming.
He's got to wear himself out eventually.
Huh. That mongrel's got a stubborn street fear to Vickerstown. I'm surprised his boiler hasn't burst from it.
Would it be so bad if it did?
The engines agreed that something must be done, but none knew what. Mike was unlikely quiet all day. Finally, he spoke up.
Look at you all. That oversized rowing pin is trying to ruin our railway, and all you're doing is moping and trying to reason with him. Oh yes, because you never mope around the yard. I'm serious. There comes a time when words aren't going to fix anything. You have to stand up on your own wheels and show that entitled creep they can't push you around anymore.
Rex was only teasing, but...
Well then, Mike, if you think standing up to George is so easy, why don't you do it?
Mike didn't even wait to answer.
I think I will.
Instead, he buckled up to Bert's hopper trucks and he flounced out of the yard.
Oh wait, Mike! I was kidding! Oh, now he takes me seriously.
He can't go out there. That George is a monster.
What happened to I'll push George aside, Jock?
I changed my mind when he said he'd squish me.
Oh dear, nothing good can come from those two clashing.
Aye, 'tis a brave thing the wee engine's doing.
Brave and foolish, more like. Well, all we can do now is hope for the best. Yeah. Hey Frank, if something goes wrong, do you want Mike's space in the shed?
No one said anything. George was enjoying himself more than ever. No engine could get in the way or interrupt his work. The workmen were not enjoying themselves. They even thought George was being ridiculous, and they missed watching the engines go by as they worked. But George wasn't grumbling, and maybe they could finish the job. Or maybe not.
Huh? Here we go again.
Sure enough, coming around the bend was a very determined Mike.
Heh, he'll get scared and run away. They always do.
But Mike wouldn't run away. His eyes burned with determination.
Move!
Nothing doing. You'll just have to wait like all your scaredy friends.
Well, I'm not like my scary friends. I'm tired of waiting for you to drag your fat bunker off my railway.
Fat? What the fat bunker? Listen here, Pipsqueak. I've squashed steaming piles of scrap like you for less than that. Do yourself a favor and crawl home before you get crunched.
I'm not moving for an oversized rowing pin. Now stand aside and let me through.
Make me.
Neither Mike or George would move an inch. They just glanced each other down with burning hatred, standing their ground. The workmen stood well back. The air was tense and thick. No one even dared to breathe. No one was hurt, but Mike's whistle startled George so much it rushed into his barrier. He looked very shaken. The workmen were very surprised, but tried not to laugh.
Thank you. Now was that so hard?
George didn't answer. He just watched as Mike puffed away.
You shouldn't have done that, Mike. You know you'll be in trouble for this, right? I don't care. I showed that galloping tricycle what's what, and that's all that matters.
Mike just smiled to himself, feeling very pleased. He wasn't so pleased later that evening, for there was one person Mike truly was afraid of. Mr. Fergus, Duncan, and Sir Topham Hatt called Mike and George to the yard, and both controllers looked very disappointed.
Now, Mike, I'm pleased with you finishing the ballast work, but not how you achieved it. Playing tricks like that around a work site is very dangerous.
Mike felt very ashamed.
George could have backed into something important, or people could have gotten hurt, or worse.
George just snickered.
As for you, George, you've been worse. You were brought in to mend the roads, not cause calamity by deliberately blocking the rails for no real reason. But sir, the engines were disturbing the workmen.
No, they weren't. We were told to clear the lines when they came by, and we did. You were the one making a fuss.
Now George looked ashamed, and he was fresh out of excuses.
The roads still need repairing and we still have railways to run.
But if we hear you two causing trouble again, then George, I shall take away your roller and have you sawing wood at the timber mill.
And Mike, I shall take away your red coat and have you painted green again.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Right away, sir.
And that was that. For the rest of the week, George worked on the road repairs in silence. He didn't make a fuss or try to block anyone. Mike or any of the other engines went past, he just looked away. In turn, Mike and the other engines didn't even look at George. It was very tense and silent for a few days. But at last, the road was done, and George went home in disgrace. Things returned to normal on the Lower West End, but for several days, Mike acted very pleased with himself.
I think I liked it better when you were grumpy. Ha! You're all just jealous because I was the one who got rid of George. I stood up to him while the rest of you just ran away with your tenders behind your wheels. Is that so? The way I heard, it sounds like George wasn't scared by you, just your whistle. And I can't blame him. It's the most hideous thing I've ever heard. What?
The other engines just laughed and laughed. But Mike was so cross, his face was so red as his boiler. Jock was trying not to laugh himself.
Never mind then, Mike. It took a brave engine to stand up to George.
That made Mike feel a little bit better, but for the longest time, the grumpy miniature engine didn't want to hear any more about steamrollers.